Hello, it is IR Smart, and welcome to another IR Smart video. Now, today, we're going to be talking about something a bit interesting. Now, I'd been doing a little bit of reading, online that is, I don't actually read any books anymore, but I did some reading online, and it turns out that George Lucas actually originally had a plan for the sequel trilogy. Yes, before he sold to Disney, he had his own plan he was kind of working on. He had some thoughts written down and stuff. And see, I just found that so interesting. Because, everyone always complains, like, oh, the Disney sequel trilogy, it's so bad, it's so dumb and all that stuff. But I wonder, would it be any better if George Lucas was in charge? And the thing is, there are a decent amount of details available about this sequel trilogy. So I'm going to be going through those today. You may have heard about these. It's not like this is new information. It's just new to me. I was looking into it. I think this came about a couple years ago, where there was this book. It was called the Star Wars Archives. It had a ton of like interviews and stuff with George Lucas. And in this, a little bit, he talked about his plan for the sequels. Some of this information comes from different sources. I've kind of just compiled it all together into one neat video. I'm going to be doing some, speculation as well, kind of thinking, what I think what would happen if George Lucas was still in charge of Star Wars, had he never sold it to Disney. Had he decided, you know what, I'm going to keep this. I'm going to make another sequel trilogy. That's obviously not what he did. One of the main reasons he actually sold it to Disney was for his family. He was working on this new trilogy and realized, hey, this is going to take another, 10 years of my life? I don't want to do that. I want to just retire, spend time with my family. And I honestly get that. That makes a lot of sense, But that's what we ended up getting. He sold it to Disney for like $1 bazillion, and that's where we are today. But anyway, the point of this video is we're gonna talk about the George Lucas trilogy. So let's get into it. So first, this trilogy would start with Episode 7, as you would think. But the interesting thing was this was kind of like what George Lucas pitched to Disney. He was like, hey, here's my idea for the sequel trilogy. Can you guys, camera, focus on me. Jeez. He was like, hey Disney, here's my idea for the sequels. Please do this. And they were like, okay, we'll do that. They didn't do that. They ended up going their whole other way and made this whole thing. It was pretty interesting. George Lucas actually called them the white slavers. He was like, yeah, I sold my baby, being Star Wars, off to the white slavers. Disney got very upset at him, and he had to retract this statement. Just a little fun fact I thought I'd share with you. But anyway, this trilogy he had thought out was actually going to be focused around Leia, which is pretty interesting. Even more interesting was that George Lucas was going to definitively say that Leia, not Luke, not Luke, not Anakin, not anybody else, Leia is the chosen one. Yes, that was his idea. He was going to have Leia be the chosen one. You see, people always complain about the sequels, like, oh, Palpatine coming back, totally ruins Anakin being the chosen one. But, even George Lucas himself was like, yeah, I think Leia should be the chosen one. Like, what? Huh? This is straight from George Lucas. There's a quote of him, talking about this. He wanted Leia to be the chosen one. Don't know why. So she would have been, trained to be a Jedi with Luke, but also being the leader of the New Republic. So that's pretty interesting. I don't really know where that would have gone. But also, while we're talking about Luke here, he would have been, rebuilding his Jedi Academy and that sort of thing. Kind of like what we see in Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett. And also they kind of touch on the sequels, but more like what we're seeing in Book of Boba Fett. We see this more heroic version of Luke, who's, starting up the Jedi Order and that sort of thing. And not nearly as dark and depressed as he is in Episode 8. So that would be pretty interesting. I think definitely there would be people who prefer it. I kind of like either one. But I think there's definitely a lot of people who didn't like Luke in Episode 8. So I think they'd probably be more happy with this version of Luke, who was more heroic and, Jedi saving the galaxy sort of thing. Oh yeah. Also, Han and Leia's kids would have a part. Luke wouldn't have any children, because he's a Jedi, I guess. But specifically, Han and Leia would have multiple children, not just Ben Solo, apparently. And it's not really certain whether or not they would still be called Ben Solo, but there probably would be a character like Kylo Ren, Ben Solo, in this trilogy. But a lot of these details are kind of sketchy. But also, interestingly enough, it's possible that Kira, who, if you're not familiar, Kira was kind of this concept character they made. And it was going to be originally called Kira with a K, and then that later ended up becoming Rey. I think I've mentioned this before, but this Kira character was kind of like a scavenger character, and they even drew up concept art of her character swimming around the wreckage of the Death Star. Yeah, kind of like what they did in Episode 9. They have her swimming around and oh, look at that, that's the Death Star underwater, because I don't know. I don't know why they think that's a good idea. It doesn't make any sense. The thing blew up, but whatever. So yeah, that almost happened. I'd also like to mention while we're at it that, this is George Lucas we're talking about. So, with this trilogy, you'd have to get ready for a couple things, We'd have to get ready for clunky dialogue and all sorts of weird stuff like that, kind of like what's in the prequels, and even to the original trilogy to an extent. Midichlorians, there'd be a ton about that. This would apparently be a major plot point. Midichlorians. Yeah, remember those things they talked about in the prequels that give people 4 stars? They would have a major plot in this story. Not just like an offhand mention. They would be a major part of the story. You know, getting more and more into this lore that George Lucas thinks is really interesting when it really isn't. Also Jar Jar. I don't think this was explicitly mentioned, but from what I know about George Lucas, he has come out and said Jar Jar Binks is his favorite Star Wars character. The guy who created Star Wars created all these characters, and his favorite one is Jar Jar Binks. Yeah. So I would say there's a decent chance there would be a Gungan character, if not Jar Jar Binks himself. Also, he wouldn't be a Sith Lord, alright? I know what you're thinking. Darth Jar Jar... It wouldn't happen, okay? Jar Jar Binks isn't a Sith Lord. George Lucas did not plan that. Maybe he considered the idea for a second, but his main thing with Jar Jar was like, hey, I'm gonna make a character that's funny. And people tried to interpret that as like, oh, he's fake being funny to be a Sith Lord. No. George Lucas actually thinks Jar Jar is the funniest thing on this earth. So yeah, I don't know what's all that about. You know, maybe we can even have like a baby Jar Jar. Instead of Baby Yoda, we have Baby Jar Jar. Wouldn't that be cursed? Yeah. Okay, so now we're getting to the really, really interesting stuff. So, the villain of this trilogy would be Darth Maul. Yes. So basically George Lucas was planning this around 2012, I believe, maybe a bit earlier. And I think this was about the time that he came back in Clone Wars. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know specifically when he came back in Clone Wars. I think it was around season 3, maybe. And I think that's when he was making this. So maybe he was doing both at the same time. But somehow, you know, Darth Maul will be back. Now again, Rebels came out way after this. That was after Disney bought Star Wars. So they killed him off in Rebels. So I guess in George Lucas's timeline, Darth Maul survives to the point of the sequels and becomes the main bad guy. Kind of like what he does in Solo. He becomes like a crime lord of the underworld. But the most interesting thing about this is that his apprentice would be Darth Talon. Yeah. Now, the thing with Darth Talon is, wow, she's interesting. She's a Sith Lord character from the comics. These are the comics. I think 2006 is when she was first introduced. Now, these weren't made by George Lucas. These were made by somebody else who was taking the Star Wars and was like, hey, here's my idea. It was like these whole comics timeline are part of the extended universe now. But they're like a whole different sequel trilogy. They focused on totally different stuff. And George Lucas was kind of just like picking ideas out of that for his new sequel trilogy. And one of these things he picked out was Darth Talon, which is a character that is a Twi'lek lady who is red, looks kind of like Darth Maul, and has really big head tails. Really big head tails, because she's a Twi'lek. And, yeah, very interesting character design here. Yeah, I can definitely tell what the character designers were going for here, making her a Sith Lord. It's just a very weird character. It gets weirder, though, because, there was a canceled Darth Maul game. It was canceled in 2011 because Disney. But they were making this game. You're going to play as Darth Maul in the prequels. But when they went to go pitch this idea to George Lucas, they had the whole, like, development team, not the whole team, but like the main leads of this development team, pitching the idea to George Lucas. George Lucas walks into the room. By the way, this is like an actual thing that happened. George Lucas walks in the room, sees a little figurine of Darth Maul, and a figurine of Darth Talon. Don't know why the Darth Talon figurine was in there. The developers had no plans of putting Darth Talon in this game. Because again, Darth Talon in the comics happens way in the sequel trilogy. And this was like the prequel trilogy time. So for whatever reason, George Lucas takes these two figurines, puts them together, and says they're friends. Okay? And then he demands that they put Darth Talon in the game. And the developers are like, okay. I mean, it's George Lucas. You're not going to say no to him. You're not going to say, no, we're not going to do that. So they were just kind of like, okay, we'll put Darth Talon in the game. So they had to, like, you know, course correct and try to shove Darth Talon in this game they were already working on. And, yeah, that, among other things, is why this game got canceled. But, yeah, I don't get George Lucas's obsession with Twi'leks. Like, he created them. He created these characters that are mostly female and mostly wear revealing clothing. George, what the heck? What do you got going on here? You gotta, like, you're trying to make it not obvious that you have a thing for Twi'leks. Like, we get it, sure, but, like, what the heck, man? That's really weird. So, why is George Lucas obsessed with Twi'leks? I don't know, man. It's weird. It's really weird. Like, he creates these characters, you know, like Aayla Secura. I mean, Aayla Secura is the main one, but also, like, you know, the slave girls at Jabba's palace. Yeah, he's like, I'm gonna put them in revealing clothing. Yep, that's what I'm gonna do with them. That seems like a good idea. what the heck, man? Why? What is this thing with Twi'leks? One last thing about Darth Talon. Apparently there was a concept where she was going to be the one to corrupt one of Han Solo's children, so we're just going to call him Ben Solo, because, I mean, that's kind of the same thing. It would be one of Han's kids would turn to the dark side, and Darth Talon would be the one to corrupt him. So basically, Ben Solo would be a simp in this version, which it just makes a lot of sense, honestly. He'd be like, dang, that's what's going on the dark side? I'm going to join the dark side. Also, a little side note, George Lucas actually planned to make a Star Wars TV show. They filmed like a pilot, I think, but it never went anywhere. But there's a little bit of footage available of it. So I was thinking, if George Lucas actually did, you know, make Star Wars movies and Star Wars TV shows, kind of like what Disney's doing, I imagine that if he made the Kenobi series, it would just be about Obi-Wan living in the desert. He wouldn't go to any of their planets. He wouldn't interact with anybody. He wouldn't fight anybody. He would just live in a desert, and that would be the entire series. Because in George Lucas's mind, that's all he does. Like in Revenge of the Sith, he deliberately puts Obi-Wan on Tatooine, and just expects us to believe that he just sat there for 19 years and did nothing. That's what George Lucas wanted to happen. So that's the Kenobi series for you. If George Lucas made it, Obi-Wan sitting in a desert for 19 years, and that's the whole thing. Okay, so we're starting to wind down this video, and I'd like to mention here, I really love George Lucas. He's great. He's a great guy. You know, it kind of seems like I'm kind of like trashing on him. Like, what the heck, George? What's up with you? You're so weird and stuff. Like, I love the guy. He's amazing. He created Star Wars. I love Star Wars. It's like my favorite thing ever. So I'm not trying to trash on him and say like, oh, he's crap. But I think the thing is, I just see so many people online like, oh, Disney Star Wars is so crap. It would be way better if George Lucas is still in charge. And I'm just like, would it though? So that's kind of my point with this video. I kind of wanted to show you, like, as weird as the sequel trilogy what it ended up being, it definitely could have been weirder. Because George Lucas could have made it. And it would have been better in some ways, I guess, you know, more like concise story rather than, you know, 3 different ways it went. Because it was like, oh, Force Awakens is going this way. Nope. Last Jedi is going this way. Nope. Rise of Skywalker is going to go this way. And you have this. This is my sequel trilogy analogy. How am I doing this with my arms? Don't know. Don't know how I'm going to get it undone. So we're just going to put it down over here. So yeah, that's my whole point with this video. I just thought it would be interesting to talk about George Lucas. You know, what a guy. He almost made the sequel trilogy. But we got Disney instead, so whatever. Anyway, see ya.